Hello, and welcome once again to Lehto's Law. I'm Steve Lehto, attorney at law in the state of Michigan, where I've been practicing law for 25 years in the fields of consumer protection and lemon law. I often write about stuff for places like roadandtrack.com. Today we're going to talk about who gets traffic tickets and why. Who gets traffic tickets and why. And I apologize. Someone sent me this idea for a topic. They sent me the link to the article that I'm basing this on, and I can't find that communication. I'm not sure if it was an email or a text or a tweet, whatever it was. I apologize. If you were the one who sent me the article, go ahead and send me another note, and I'll thank you in a future podcast. But who gets traffic tickets and why? And this is based on some data that the Pioneer Press out of Minnesota did. Now, they're using data from Minnesota, but the data set they're using is quite large, and I think it's also probably going to hold true across most of the country. They analyzed 224,000 speeding tickets issued in the last 3.5 years, almost 250,000 tickets. And they looked at what the tickets were given for, who they were given to, and when they were given. And that's the information that's so fascinating to look at. So who gets traffic tickets and why? This, again, is based out of Minnesota, the data, but I believe it'll apply to pretty much anywhere. I'm in Michigan, of course. But wherever you are, it'll probably apply to you too in some general way. So for instance, how fast do you have to be going to get a ticket on the highway? Well, in Minnesota, according to the last 224,000 tickets that state troopers wrote, generally speaking, you're okay doing 5 miles an hour over, okay? It's till you get to 10 miles an hour where things change, okay? So of the more than 220,000 tickets the State Patrol wrote since 2013, only 37 of them, which is, as you might imagine, minuscule in that large of a sample, only 37 of them were for less than 5 miles an hour over the limit. So you're not going to get a ticket for doing 3 miles an hour over. Now, I've told you before, I got one for doing 3 over. And I had a cop actually say you were doing 3 over, and he wrote me a ticket for it. It was a small town. The cop was being a jackass. And he was doing it as a way to raise revenue for the city. It had nothing to do with the village. It had nothing to do with the fact that that ticket would not have even stood up in court because I believe the margin of error on how he measured my speed was probably plus or minus 3 miles per hour. But that's another story altogether. Generally speaking, tickets for speeders going between 5 and 10 miles an hour over were more common, but still rare. Nearly 97% of all ticketed drivers are going faster than 10 miles an hour over the speed limit. So if you're doing less than 10 over, you're probably safe. Mathematically, it appears you're safe. And the police officers they interviewed for this article said that's primarily because it's so easy to find drivers doing 15, 20, 25 miles an hour over the speed limit that wasting your time on the people doing 7 over doesn't seem like it makes any sense. One trooper said specifically that he sets his threshold for speeders at 15 over. He's less generous, he says, on rural interstates where the limit hits 70. There he drops to 10 over because 80 is fast. But generally speaking, he doesn't even pull people over unless it's 15 over in most situations. Now, the median speeding ticket in the last 3 years is for 15 over, or 16 over. So in other words, of the 220,000 tickets written in Minnesota for 3.5 years, if you spread them out on a spectrum with the lowest speed over down here and the highest speed over the limit down here, the ticket that would fall in the exact middle, the median, is 16 miles per hour over the speed limit. So they wrote half the tickets for more than that, half tickets for less than that. But the most common ticket was for 12 miles per hour over, and about 25% of all the tickets written in the past 3 years were for 12 over. That's just it. When asked about that specific number, state trooper said, didn't even know that was true. It just happens to be the case. So keep in mind that the statistics they're citing show what people are being cited for, not what they're pulled over for. And so you can get pulled over for doing 20 over, and a police officer can be nice and write you for doing 10 over. Or in a case like this, maybe doing 15 over and knocks it to 12 over. Maybe there's a difference. I don't know where the different breaks fall in Minnesota traffic tickets. But that is something to keep in mind. And also, remember that the police officers have discretion with how they write those tickets. We'll talk about that in a second, but I've done entire podcasts on that. how to behave when you get pulled over, specifically because of the discretion the police officers have when they pull you over. They can give you a break, and some of those breaks are probably reflected in the data sets that the Pioneer Press used to crunch these 224,000 traffic tickets to get the results. Now the question is, when are you most likely to get a ticket? And if you know human nature and you've worked in the real world, you know that morning rush hour is like a time trials, the Indy 500. I mean, there's just speeders galore on most expressways in and around America. And so you might think that traffic tickets get written quite a bit during rush hour, and that's actually the opposite of the case. Fewer were written during rush hours, both morning and afternoon, and more were written in the midday or in the time following the afternoon rush. And the police officers said that that's specifically because during rush hour, with so many people on the road, number one, you blend in. Number two, anytime they write a ticket during rush hour, it causes a traffic jam. It's not even safe to pull people over because it just causes more problems than it's worth. So they probably could write more tickets during rush hour than they do, but they don't. So one officer said you can catch your occasional speeder during rush hour. They're trying to move through traffic, changing lanes, finding small gaps, trying to keep the speed up. But for the most part, it's tough during rush hour traffic to write those tickets. Now, the interesting thing is that the tickets are more likely to be written on Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays. And again, that's because there's less traffic around you. You stand out more when you speed. So keep that in mind. If you are rushing to work on a Monday morning, you can probably drive faster than if you are rushing to do something on a Friday night in the evening. Again, I'm not condoning speeding. I'm not encouraging it. I'm not telling you to go out and speed. I'm merely pointing these things out based on the statistics. But the statistics show that you are less likely to get a ticket during morning rush hour, Monday through Thursday, than you are to get a ticket outside of those windows, especially on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. Again, this is based on 220-some thousand tickets written in Minnesota. But I suspect that a lot of this holds true in most other states. Now, the question is, who gets the most speeding tickets? Young, old, men, women? Who gets the most? This won't surprise anyone. Young people get the most tickets. State troopers in Minnesota in recent years wrote more tickets to drivers. And the interesting thing here is they wrote them to drivers as young as 14 and as old as 103. There's a problem at both ends, obviously. But ask any trooper about high-speed drivers, and they'll tell you they're talking about younger drivers. The 16 to 25-year-old set received one-third of all tickets. One-third of all tickets. And they're only 13% of the population. So they're disproportionately getting tickets, and they're driving too fast. Now, drivers 40 or older got a third of the tickets, but they make up almost half the population. So as you get older, you tend to slow down, at least with your driving. The state patrol's ticket database shows a stark trend where speeding tickets peak at age 19 and then drop off steadily as drivers age. So as young people out there need to pay attention to this, you are more likely to get a ticket if you drive fast. And, everyone remembers they first get their driver's license, then they get their first car, then they get their first accident, they get their first ticket, and you're going through a learning curve, okay? And that learning curve can be expensive, so slow down. Take it from an old guy like me. Slow down. The reason they're being charged so much more is that they're so much more likely to be risky than everybody else, says the president of a Roseville, Minnesota-based driving school. And the troopers insist they are not picking out younger drivers. Younger drivers simply drive faster. So the average 16-year-old given a speeding ticket by the state patrol is doing an average of almost 18 miles an hour over the speed limit. That's what they're ticketed for, probably driving faster. So if you are routinely driving 18 miles an hour over the speed limit, you are either driving like a crazy person or you are simply ignoring what the speed limits are. I know people who drive crazy and they don't pay attention to speed limits. So you enter town, slow down, you get in the highway, you can speed up, but know what the speed limits are and try to follow them, especially if you're in the younger group. Now, this is interesting. The database of speeding tickets the State Patrol released to the Pioneer Press doesn't list ticketed drivers by race, but it does track them by gender. And I know there's some debate about that. We can just say male or female. And at all ages, men are more likely to be ticketed. At every age, males get at least 50% more tickets than females. The gender disparity is starkest among Minnesotans over 55, where men get more than twice as many tickets as women. Now, it's possible, and the statisticians in the audience, and I know there are some because they complain whenever I misquote or misuse statistics or fail to point out all of the things that can come into play with statistics. It's possible that there are a different number of men drivers on the road, or a different percentage of them compared to women at a certain age. And I'm wondering if it's often the case that in those older sets, more of the men are driving than the women, okay? It could be. I know examples of older couples where the husband drives and the wife does not. I'm not saying those are the gender roles they should be playing in our society. I'm just simply saying I know these people, and the wife never drives. The husband drives. I'm wondering how many of these men who get ticketed for speeding were ticketed while sitting next to their wife. Doesn't make it right, okay? But it might explain a small percentage of the gender disparity in the tickets written above a certain age. And that's what we like to say. It's above a certain age. We're not old. Now, here's the question in the comments I've made earlier, is that if you are pulled over by a police officer, you're speeding, there's still hope. You've got to behave properly, because the troopers all said when interviewed for this article about the hundreds of thousands of tickets written, they say that as they approach your car, they are still in their mind doing the math on several things, one of which is the choice they make about whether they're going to give you a ticket and whether they're going to give you the ticket for what you were doing or give you a break, because they can do that. So the first thing that they point out is that some of these officers admitted that they'll actually say, I won't pull somebody over for doing 10 over. I'll only pull them over for 15 over or more, depending on the circumstances. But one officer said specifically that unless they're doing 15 over, he doesn't bat an eyelash unless there's something else going on. He did say, and this is interesting, that if he sees a group of cars all speeding at the same rate, he'll often pull over the car at the back of the pack because he's the easiest one to pull over. And I know a lot of people will do this. You're driving down the freeway and some guy passes you doing 10 miles an hour faster than you. And your thought process is, I can pull in behind this guy. And if we both blow by a police officer who's got a radar gun out, he's obviously going to clock the guy in the front, right? I mean, that seems to make sense. So if anyone's going to get pulled over, isn't it going to be him? Trooper here is saying, no, I'll pull over the guy in the back. He's easier to get. So again, be careful. This trooper points out that once he's clocked you with the laser from the side of the road when he's parked, he'll often pull out and clock you from his car using a different device. And doing that with the stationary speed and then the motion speed, it makes it a much stronger case. So, I know people who say, well, Steve, can't we beat this ticket? I don't think I was doing what he clocked me at. Well, number one, beating a laser is really difficult. Beating a radar gun can be done if you can prove it wasn't calibrated properly and so on, but it's tough. You see very few tickets thrown out by beating the technology. But this officer says that from when he sees you speeding, when he's getting pulled over, it might only be 30 seconds, maybe a minute, depending on how long it takes you to get over. And he says, however, from the stop perspective is where things get interesting. Because as this officer who's telling the story walks up to a pulled over car during the side of the road, at the side of the road, his mind is racing, making assessments on what's happening in the car. Now, I've talked about this, that when you're sitting there in your car, roll your window down, hands on the wheel, dome light on if it's dark out, and you're just sitting there. Don't be moving around. Don't duck underneath. Don't turn the lights off. Don't leave your window up. Try to make it easy on the police officer. And here's a police officer saying that this is what he's thinking as he approaches your car. He says that he looks in the back to see if there's passengers, And he says he pays special attention to look for gun cases or evidence of firearms. And again, that's a concern because police officers do get shot. Okay? And he says all this time the dash camera's running. He's got a body mic on, so it's all being recorded. And he says that he tries to be polite but firm at the window. Now again, if he's going to be polite to you, why can't you be polite to him? Most people are, but I've had people tell me, they say, Steve, cop walked up, I was in a bad mood, I told him what to do. Where to go. Doesn't help any. So he says that knowing it's a formal police stop, that they can, referring to the driver can be nervous, but I'm trying to be cordial, so be cordial back. He says he's watching to see how cordial a stop driver is. He goes, and this is a quote, as troopers, we get a lot of discretion, especially with speeding violations. So they have discretion. You want to encourage them. You want to make it easier for them to do that to you, to give you the break. So he says being polite to the officer can be a good way to get a warning or cited for a lower speed. Politeness is not a guarantee, especially for particularly fast drivers or those with long records. So if you've got a bad driving record and you're going 30 over, you're getting a ticket, okay? But if you're going 10 over and you got a good record and you're polite, maybe you won't. So this officer says he'll cut a little bit of a break depending on what the person was doing and so on. But he says that he does not consider the tickets to be punitive. He's not trying to punish people. He's just trying to get people to slow down. He says the message is slow down. It's not worth it. Do you want to put out money for speeding tickets this month? I don't. So price isn't worth it. Consequences that could happen if you were involved in a serious crash as a result of speeding, none of that stuff is worth it. So this is a great article. It's out of the Pioneer Press. Sophie Carson and David Montgomery are the reporters who did all the hard work and the math on that and the heavy lifting. And like I said, they crunched the data from 224,000 tickets written by the state troopers in Minnesota. And they came to some pretty interesting conclusions, and I think that that's stuff that we can learn from. So that's who gets traffic tickets and why. Questions or comments, shoot them my way. LehtosLaw.com, LehtosLaw.com. I'm on Twitter at Steve Lehto, at SteveLehto. And this show is on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Podbean, Google Play, and YouTube. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.